Phil seems to be waiting for someone in a restaurant. His date finally arrives. She notices him looking weird at her. He tells her it's her hair. They're curly. In her profile photo, they were straight. He hears a girl saying hello. He looks around, but can't find her. He replies back in his mind. He wants the voice to stop. He goes to the bathroom and believes he is going crazy. He asks the voice to get out of his head, but the voice tells him to get out of her head. She says she was at home, and his voice just popped into her head. They both don't like this. So, they both decide not to talk to each other. Later, Phil is at a supermarket. He tries to contact the voice, and she responds. He goes to a therapist and tells everything. Therapist believes that the voice is him, since he's lonely, and he blames all his dates for that. He tells his therapist that the voice and him made a deal to not talk to each other. His therapist tells him about dissociative identity disorder. The voice says that she's bored. She tells him that her shrink told her the same thing that his shrink is telling him now. Phil gets up and leaves. They start talking to each other. He asks her if she can see what he sees. She denies. She can only hear him, and that too when he's thinking at her. They decide to get a pizza. She wants to take advantage of their situation, cause she feels like this is some superpower. He asks her who she is, and tells her that he is Phil Hayes. She is Annie Mitchell. She is from Diamond Falls, and he is from Ashford City, which is 100 miles away. They agree not to look up each other, to maintain a kind of mystery. Later, Phil picks up his phone, and looks for Annie, and finds someone. They continue talking to each other. Days pass, and they both are totally into each other. Phil wants to meet her in person. Annie says it's complicated, and stops responding. Phil looks at Annie's photos online. He notices Annie wearing a wedding ring in one of her photos. He confronts her, and she says she never said that they're exclusive. He's mad at her for not telling him. She tells him that she feels trapped in her marriage, and is not happy. Nobody gets her, the way Phil does, and she feels a connection. Phil can't sleep at night. He calls for Annie. He tells her that he wishes for her to be here. Phil wonders what's his purpose in life is, as he doesn't feel special. Next morning, Phil wakes up, and tells Annie that past few weeks have been the best of his life. He wants to meet her today. Annie tells him that they're in too deep, and she wants it to stop. She says it's dangerous, and she can't do this. She stops responding to him. He's devastated. He starts drinking a lot. He starts crying when he sees a couple. He loses it, and gets angry at her, but then apologizes later. He tries to look up her address online, but there are too many people with the same name. There's someone at the door. It's his landlord, asking for rent. He begs Annie to say something, because he wants to know if this was real. Later, Phil goes on a date with some girl. It is not going well. Suddenly, Annie calls for him. She tells him that she needs him, and that she was a wreck without him. She wants to meet him. They decide to meet in Pilsen Bay, halfway between him and her. Phil gets a nice haircut, buys new clothes, and buys a book for her. She tells him that there's a guy staring at her. She decides to change the train car, but he starts following her. He sits right next to her. Her train stopped, and she decides to get off at the Kingswood station. Her stalker got off the train too. She is behind a big horse. He's coming. There's a holiday market, and she runs for it. She tells him that she's safe now. But she sees him again. Annie screams, and stops responding. It's still 4 hours to Kingswood station. He finally reaches the station, and starts searching for Annie. He sees the big horse. He reaches the market. He notices glasses on the floor. Annie suddenly calls for him. She tells him it's dark and smells musty. She thinks she's in the woods. She hears an owl in the distance. Phil follows the sound of the owl into the woods. He sees a house. He knocks, and asks if there are any other houses in the area. He confronts the guy. The man threatens to call the cops. Phil dares him to do so. He confirms the guy's looks with Annie, and then attacks him. He beats the guy dead. A little girl comes up behind Phil, calling for her dad. Annie comes to her kid. She doesn't recognize Phil. She screams in horror. Cops arrive, and arrest Phil. Phil thinks his shrink was right, he is crazy. He completely loses it. Annie then reveals to Phil that she used him to get him to kill his husband, so she can have a better future for herself and her daughter. She told him what he wanted to hear, and he killed for it. The episode ends with Annie saying goodbye to Phil. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.